The morning mist hung low over Windsor Castle as Sergeant Thomas Mitchell adjusted his scarlet tunic for what he believed would be another routine day of royal duty. At 32 years old, Thomas had served the crown for over a decade, earning respect from his fellow guards and superiors alike. His pristine record spoke volumes about his dedication to protecting the royal family, and his unwavering commitment had never once been questioned. Thomas came from humble beginnings in Yorkshire, where his father worked in the coal mines and his mother cleaned houses for wealthy families. The uniform he wore with such pride represented more than just a job to him. It was the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and an unshakable belief in duty and honor. His younger sister Emily often joked that he was born to wear the Queen's colors, and Thomas never disagreed with that assessment. The castle grounds were bustling with their usual morning activity as staff prepared for the day ahead. Thomas took his position at the main entrance, his trained eyes scanning the surroundings with the practiced vigilance that had become second nature to him. The weight of his responsibilities never felt heavy on his shoulders. Instead, it gave him purpose and meaning that extended far beyond the paycheck he received every month. As the clock struck 9, the familiar sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. Queen Camilla emerged from the private quarters, her expression showing the slight weariness that comes with the countless obligations of royal life. She was scheduled for a charity luncheon that afternoon, followed by a meeting with local council members about community development projects. Her schedule was packed, as it always was, with little time for the personal moments that ordinary people took for granted. Thomas snapped to attention as protocol demanded, his posture perfect, and his gaze fixed straight ahead. He had performed this same ritual thousands of times before, and the precision of his movements reflected years of military training and royal service. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors where he stood guard. Queen Camilla paused momentarily as she passed, her eyes catching sight of a small imperfection in Thomas's uniform, a barely noticeable loose thread on his collar that would have been invisible to most observers. In the high-pressure environment of royal service, where every detail mattered and public appearances were scrutinized by millions, such minor issues were often addressed immediately to maintain the institution's reputation. What happened next would change everything for Thomas Mitchell and send shockwaves through the entire British establishment. Queen Camilla, perhaps influenced by the stress of her demanding schedule or simply having a momentary lapse in judgment, made a remark that cut through the morning air like a blade. Her words, though spoken quietly, carried the weight of centuries of royal authority and social hierarchy. "Sergeant Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying a tone that Thomas had never heard directed at him before. "Perhaps it's time you learned that attention to detail separates those who belong in royal service from those who merely pretend to. Your appearance today suggests you might be better suited for less demanding work elsewhere." The words hung in the air between them, creating a tension that seemed to freeze time itself. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face as the implications of her statement sank in. This wasn't just criticism of his uniform. It was a fundamental questioning of his worthiness to serve, delivered in front of other staff members who had suddenly found themselves unwilling witnesses to an unprecedented moment. For Thomas, who had dedicated his entire adult life to serving the crown with distinction, the remark felt like a physical blow. He had missed family gatherings, postponed personal relationships, and sacrificed countless opportunities to maintain his position as one of the most trusted guards in royal service. His personnel file was filled with commendations, and he had never received so much as a verbal warning in his entire career. The other staff members present, 2 housekeepers, a junior secretary, and another guard, stood frozen in uncomfortable silence. They all knew Thomas's reputation and had witnessed firsthand his dedication to duty. The loose thread that had triggered the Queen's remark was so minor that most of them hadn't even noticed it until she pointed it out. The severity of her response seemed entirely disproportionate to such a trivial imperfection. Thomas's mind raced as he processed what had just occurred. The training that had been drilled into him for years demanded that he remain silent and accept any criticism from his superiors without question. Royal guards were expected to be invisible servants, present when needed but never drawing attention to themselves through words or actions that might be seen as inappropriate. Yet something deeper within him stirred. a sense of injustice that went beyond personal hurt feelings. He thought of his father, who had worked himself into an early grave in the mines to provide for his family. He remembered his mother's hands, cracked and worn from years of cleaning other people's homes while dreaming of a better life for her children. The uniform he wore represented not just his own achievements, but the hopes and sacrifices of everyone who had believed in him. The queen waited for his response, her expression suggesting she expected the usual deferential acceptance that royal staff members were trained to provide. The other witnesses held their breath, understanding that they were present for what could become either a forgotten moment of royal pique or something far more significant. Thomas looked directly at Queen Camilla for the first time since she had spoken, his eyes meeting hers with a steadiness that surprised everyone present, including himself. The respect he had always shown for the institution of monarchy remained intact, but something had fundamentally shifted in that moment. The man who had spent years perfecting the art of invisible service was about to step into the light in a way that would change everything. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken tension and the weight of centuries of royal protocol. What Thomas Mitchell would say next would not only determine his own fate, but would also force an entire nation to confront uncomfortable truths about power, respect, and the dignity that every person deserves, regardless of their position in society's hierarchy. In that moment before he spoke, Thomas felt the presence of every person who had ever been dismissed or diminished by those in power. His response would echo far beyond the marble halls of Windsor Castle, reaching into the hearts and minds of ordinary people across Britain who understood what it meant to be judged not by their character or dedication, but by arbitrary standards that seemed designed to keep them in their assigned places. The morning mist outside had lifted, and bright sunlight now flooded through the windows, illuminating a scene that would soon become the subject of intense national debate. Thomas Mitchell, the coal miner's son from Yorkshire who had devoted his life to royal service, was about to deliver words that would leave Britain silent and force a reckoning with the very foundations of the monarchy's relationship with those who served it. Thomas Mitchell's voice, when it finally came, was steady and clear, carrying none of the deference that royal protocol demanded in such circumstances. His words would later be described by witnesses as having an almost otherworldly calm, as if he had found a source of strength that transcended the immediate tension of the moment. "Your Majesty," he began, his Yorkshire accent more pronounced than usual, "I have served this crown for 12 years without a single blemish on my record. I have stood guard through blizzards and heat waves, through terrorist threats and peaceful celebrations. I have missed my father's funeral because duty called, and I have postponed my own wedding twice to ensure the royal family's security was never compromised." The Queen's expression shifted slightly, perhaps recognizing that this was not going to be the typical humble acceptance of criticism she had expected. The other staff members remained frozen in place, acutely aware that they were witnessing something unprecedented in the carefully controlled world of royal service. Thomas continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. "The loose thread you've noticed represents not carelessness, but the fact that I was up until 3 this morning reviewing security protocols after receiving intelligence about a potential threat to Prince William's upcoming engagement. I had exactly 20 minutes to prepare my uniform this morning because I spent those hours ensuring your family's safety." A heavy silence fell over the corridor as the implications of his words sank in. Thomas was not merely defending himself. He was laying bare the human cost of the perfection that royal service demanded. The other guards knew exactly what he meant. They had all sacrificed personal moments and family time in service of maintaining the illusion of effortless royal grandeur. Furthermore, Thomas said, his gaze never wavering from the Queen's face, dismissing someone based on a minor imperfection while ignoring 12 years of exemplary service sends a message that would make your mother-in-law, the late Queen Elizabeth, deeply disappointed. She understood that true nobility comes not from pointing out others' flaws, but from recognizing their dedication and treating them with the dignity every human being deserves. The mention of Queen Elizabeth created an almost electric tension in the air. Everyone present knew how much Queen Camilla had struggled to win public acceptance after Diana's death, and how she had worked to honor the late Queen's legacy. Thomas's words were not just a defense of his own character. They were a challenge to the very foundation of how power should be exercised in the modern monarchy. Queen Camilla's face flushed slightly, and, for a moment, it seemed as though she might retreat from the confrontation. But something in Thomas's unwavering stance seemed to demand a response. The weight of royal authority that she had invoked with her initial remark now felt like a burden rather than a privilege. "Sergeant Mitchell," she said, her voice quieter now, but still carrying an edge of irritation. "Your service record is not in question here. However, maintaining standards is essential to standards." Thomas interrupted, a breach of protocol so severe that one of the housekeepers audibly gasped. "Your Majesty, with the greatest respect, what standard does it serve to humiliate a faithful servant in front of his colleagues? What standard allows someone in a position of ultimate privilege to diminish another person's worth based on a piece of thread?" The conversation had crossed into territory that royal protocol had never been designed to handle. Thomas was not being insubordinate in the traditional sense. His words were respectful in tone, but revolutionary in content. He was forcing a member of the royal family to confront the human impact of their words and actions in a way that rarely happened within the insulated world of palace life. "I come from a family that taught me honor means standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult," Thomas continued. "My father may have worked in the mines, and my mother may have cleaned other people's houses, but they raised me to believe that every person has inherent dignity that cannot be taken away by anyone, regardless of their title or position." The other staff members exchanged glances, recognizing in Thomas's words their own experiences and struggles. Many of them came from similar working-class backgrounds and had felt the subtle and not-so-subtle reminders of their place in the social hierarchy. His courage in speaking truth to power was resonating with something deep in their own hearts. Queen Camilla seemed to realize that the situation had escalated far beyond her initial intention. What had begun as a routine correction about uniform standards had become a profound challenge to the very nature of royal authority and the treatment of those who serve the crown. The corridor felt charged with an energy that suggested this moment would have consequences extending far beyond their immediate circle. "Perhaps," Thomas said, his voice softening slightly but losing none of its conviction, "the question isn't whether my uniform meets your standards today. Perhaps the question is whether this institution's treatment of the people who dedicate their lives to serving it meets the standards of basic human decency that the British people expect from their royal family." These words hit their target with devastating precision. Queen Camilla had spent years working to rehabilitate her public image and demonstrate her commitment to modernizing the monarchy. Thomas's challenge struck at the heart of these efforts, suggesting that true modernization required not just public relations campaigns, but fundamental changes in how the royal family treated those around them. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone present understood that they had witnessed something that could not be undone or forgotten. Thomas had not simply defended himself. He had articulated a criticism of royal behavior that went to the very core of the monarchy's relationship with the people who served it and, by extension, with the British people themselves. Word of the confrontation spread through the castle staff with the speed of wildfire. By lunchtime, every employee from the head chef to the newest cleaning person knew that Sergeant Thomas Mitchell had done something unprecedented. Some whispered that he had gone too far, while others quietly expressed admiration for his courage in speaking truths that had long needed to be said. The royal protection officers who worked alongside Thomas were particularly affected by his words. They recognized their own sacrifices in his description of missed family events and postponed personal milestones. Many of them had similar stories of choosing duty over personal happiness, only to find their dedication taken for granted or, worse, criticized over trivial matters. As the day progressed, the weight of what had happened began to settle on everyone involved. Queen Camilla retreated to her private quarters, reportedly canceling her afternoon appointments. Thomas remained at his post, outwardly calm but internally processing the magnitude of what he had done. He knew that his career in royal service was likely over, but he felt a sense of peace that surprised him. The other witnesses to the exchange found themselves grappling with their own complicity in a system that had allowed such moments to pass unchallenged for so long. They began to question whether their silence in the face of unfair treatment had enabled a culture where dedicated servants could be casually dismissed over insignificant imperfections. By evening, rumors of the confrontation had reached the ears of senior palace officials, who recognized immediately that this was not a situation that could be handled through normal channels. The implications of a royal guard publicly challenging a member of the royal family's behavior went far beyond personnel management. It touched on the very legitimacy of the monarchy's claim to represent British values of fairness and respect. As night fell over Windsor Castle, Thomas Mitchell stood his final watch as a royal guard, knowing that tomorrow would bring consequences he could not fully anticipate. But he also knew that he had chosen honor over security, dignity over deference, and truth over the comfortable silence that had protected an unjust status quo for far too long. The following morning brought with it an atmosphere of unprecedented tension within Windsor Castle. Senior staff members moved through the corridors with carefully neutral expressions, while junior employees whispered in hushed tones about the previous day's extraordinary confrontation. The normal rhythms of royal service had been disrupted by something that none of them had experienced before, a fundamental challenge to the established order that governed their daily lives. Colonel James Hartwell, the head of royal security, arrived at his office to find an urgent message waiting for him. The palace communications team had already been alerted to the situation, and several high-ranking officials were demanding immediate meetings to discuss how to handle what they were quietly referring to as the Mitchell incident. The implications of allowing a royal guard's challenge to go unaddressed were clear to everyone involved in managing the monarchy's public image. Meanwhile, Thomas Mitchell reported for duty as scheduled, his uniform impeccable and his bearing as professional as ever. His fellow guards watched him with a mixture of admiration and concern, unsure whether to treat him as a hero or a pariah. The man who had always blended seamlessly into the background of royal service now found himself at the center of intense scrutiny from colleagues who were struggling to understand how someone they thought they knew could have acted so boldly. The ripple effects of the confrontation were already spreading beyond the castle walls. One of the housekeepers, Maria Santos, had shared the story with her husband during their evening phone call. He worked as a journalist for a small regional newspaper and immediately recognized the significance of what his wife had witnessed. By morning, he had made several discreet phone calls to contacts at larger publications, planting seeds of what would soon become a national story. Queen Camilla spent a restless night wrestling with the implications of Thomas's words. Despite her initial anger at being challenged so directly, she could not escape the uncomfortable truth that his criticism had touched on her deepest insecurities about her role in the royal family. His mention of Queen Elizabeth had been particularly painful, as she continued to struggle with comparisons to her beloved predecessor who had seemed to effortlessly command respect and devotion from those around her. The Queen Consort's private secretary, Rebecca Harrison, had served the royal family for over 20 years and had never encountered a situation quite like this one. She understood that the traditional response would be to quietly dismiss Thomas and hope the incident was forgotten, but she also recognized that such an approach might not be sufficient in an age of social media and increased scrutiny of royal behavior. As the morning progressed, word of the confrontation continued to spread through networks of palace staff, former employees, and their extended families. The story grew with each telling, sometimes embellished with additional details, but the core narrative remained consistent. A dedicated servant had spoken truth to power in a way that challenged the very foundations of royal authority. Thomas's sister Emily, working as a teacher in Leeds, received a phone call from a childhood friend who had heard rumors about her brother's confrontation with royalty. Emily knew immediately that something significant had happened, as Thomas had always been scrupulously careful about maintaining confidentiality regarding his royal duties. The fact that word was spreading suggested that this incident was unlike anything he had been involved in before. Colonel Hartwell's first meeting of the day was with Sir Anthony Whitfield, the Queen's private secretary, who had been with the royal household for nearly 3 decades. Both men understood the delicate balance required to maintain royal dignity while avoiding actions that might generate negative publicity. The challenge they faced was unprecedented. How to respond to a subordinate who had challenged royal authority not through insubordination or disloyalty, but through an appeal to higher principles of human dignity and fair treatment. The problem Sir Anthony explained during their private conference, is that Sergeant Mitchell's words, however inappropriate in their delivery, contained enough truth to make any response extremely delicate. If we simply dismiss him, we risk appearing vindictive and confirming his accusations about unfair treatment. If we ignore the incident, we risk undermining royal authority and encouraging similar challenges in the future. The two men spent hours discussing various approaches, all of which seemed to carry significant risks. They considered transferring Thomas to a different position, offering him early retirement with full benefits, or even attempting to frame the confrontation as a misunderstanding that had been resolved amicably. None of these options felt adequate to address the fundamental challenge that his words had presented to the established order. Meanwhile, in the staff quarters, conversations about the incident were revealing deep-seated frustrations that many employees had never previously articulated. Stories emerged of other instances where dedicated staff members had been treated dismissively or unfairly by members of the royal family. These conversations, while conducted in private, were creating a sense of solidarity among workers who had previously seen themselves as isolated individuals serving a great institution. Sarah Williams, who had worked as a palace cook for 8 years, found herself sharing an experience she had never discussed with her colleagues before. 2 years earlier, Prince Andrew had criticized her preparation of a traditional English breakfast, suggesting that someone from her background couldn't be expected to understand proper royal standards. She had accepted the criticism silently at the time, but Thomas's courage in speaking out had given her a new perspective on that incident. The afternoon brought an unexpected development when Rebecca Harrison received a call from a reporter at the Times who claimed to have information about a significant incident involving a member of the royal family and a staff member. The reporter was clearly fishing for details, but the fact that the story had already reached the mainstream media meant that the palace's options for quietly managing the situation were rapidly disappearing. Queen Camilla, after hours of private reflection, requested a meeting with Colonel Hartwell and Sir Anthony. The three of them gathered in her private study, a room that had witnessed countless discussions about managing royal crises over the years. However, none of them had experience dealing with a situation where the crisis had been precipitated by a valid moral challenge rather than scandalous behavior or political miscalculation. "I've been thinking about what Sergeant Mitchell said," the Queen began, her voice carrying a weariness that suggested she had genuinely grappled with his words. While his manner of expressing himself was entirely inappropriate, I cannot deny that some of his points about the treatment of staff deserve consideration. The question is how we address this situation in a way that maintains proper protocol while acknowledging legitimate concerns. The admission that Thomas's criticism had merit was significant, as it suggested that Queen Camilla was prepared to engage with the substance of his challenge rather than simply punishing him for the manner of its delivery. This opened up possibilities for resolution that went beyond the traditional responses of dismissal or transfer that had initially seemed inevitable. Sir Anthony recognized the delicate nature of the Queen's position. Any response that appeared to validate Thomas's criticism risked encouraging similar challenges from other staff members, potentially undermining the hierarchy that kept the royal household functioning smoothly. However, a response that ignored the valid concerns he had raised risked confirming public suspicions that the royal family was out of touch with basic principles of fair treatment and human dignity. As evening approached, Thomas Mitchell prepared for what he assumed might be his final shift as a royal guard. He had heard whispers throughout the day suggesting that senior officials were meeting to discuss his fate, and he had made peace with the likelihood that his career in royal service was ending. Yet he felt no regret about his decision to speak out, recognizing that some principles were more important than job security. The story was beginning to leak beyond the palace walls in ways that would soon make private resolution impossible. A former palace employee, speaking anonymously to a tabloid journalist, confirmed that tensions between royal family members and staff had been building for months. While the specific details of Thomas's confrontation remained unclear to outside observers, the broader narrative of staff mistreatment was beginning to emerge in ways that would soon capture public attention. As night fell over Windsor Castle, the key players in this unfolding drama prepared for decisions that would determine not only Thomas Mitchell's future, but potentially reshape the relationship between the royal family and those who dedicated their lives to serving the crown. The young man from Yorkshire who had simply wanted to serve his country with honor had inadvertently triggered a reckoning that would force the monarchy to confront uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and the dignity that every person deserves. The breaking point came 72 hours after the confrontation when the Times published a front-page story titled, "Palace Guard Challenges Royal Treatment of Staff." The reporter had managed to piece together enough details from multiple sources to create a compelling narrative about Thomas Mitchell's extraordinary moment of moral courage. While the palace had hoped to manage the situation privately, the story's publication meant that the entire British public would now be weighing in on the controversy. The article, written by veteran royal correspondent Margaret Thornberry, presented Thomas as a dedicated servant who had finally reached his breaking point after years of witnessing unfair treatment of palace staff. The piece included quotes from unnamed sources describing other incidents where royal family members had behaved dismissively toward employees, painting a picture of an institution where basic human dignity was often sacrificed to maintain aristocratic privilege. Within hours of the story's publication, social media exploded with reactions from across British society. The hashtag #StandWithThomas began trending on Twitter, with thousands of ordinary citizens sharing their own experiences of being treated poorly by employers or authority figures. Thomas Mitchell, the quiet guard from Yorkshire, had inadvertently become a symbol of working-class dignity in the face of privileged indifference. The response from the British public was immediate and overwhelmingly supportive of Thomas's position. Comments flooded social media platforms praising his courage and criticizing what many saw as Queen Camilla's inappropriate behavior. Veterans organizations issued statements supporting Thomas, noting that his military service and dedication to duty deserved better treatment from those he had sworn to protect. Trade union leaders seized upon the story as an example of the ongoing struggle for worker dignity across all sectors of British society. Several prominent politicians, carefully avoiding direct criticism of the Queen, issued statements supporting the principle that all workers deserved respectful treatment regardless of their employer's status. The story had transcended its origins as a palace personnel matter and become a broader referendum on power dynamics in modern Britain. Inside Windsor Castle, the atmosphere had become increasingly tense as senior staff grappled with the public relations disaster unfolding around them. Phone calls poured in from media outlets around the world, all seeking comment on the story that was quickly becoming an international symbol of class conflict and the changing relationship between traditional authority and democratic values. Queen Camilla found herself in an impossible position. Any attempt to defend her initial comments would be seen as doubling down on behavior that the public had already judged harshly. However, any apology would be interpreted as an admission of wrongdoing that could undermine royal authority more broadly. The careful balance that the monarchy had maintained between tradition and modernity was being tested in ways that previous generations of royals had never faced. The situation became even more complicated when Prince William, apparently acting without consultation with senior palace officials, issued a brief statement through his personal social media accounts. "All those who serve the crown deserve to be treated with dignity and respect," he wrote. "The dedication of our security personnel and household staff enables the royal family to fulfill our duties to the British people, and their service should be honored, not diminished." While Prince William's statement did not explicitly criticize Queen Camilla or support Thomas Mitchell, its timing and content were widely interpreted as a rebuke of the Queen Consort's behavior. Royal watchers noted that such a public intervention by the heir to the throne was unprecedented and suggested deep divisions within the royal family about how to handle the crisis. The pressure on palace officials to take decisive action was mounting by the hour. Colonel Hartwell and Sir Anthony found themselves fielding calls from Downing Street, where government officials were concerned about the potential impact on the monarchy's reputation. The Prime Minister's office made it clear that while they could not intervene directly in royal personnel matters, they expected the situation to be resolved in a way that upheld British values of fairness and respect for working people. Thomas Mitchell, meanwhile, had become a reluctant celebrity whose every movement was being tracked by journalists and photographers. He continued reporting for duty as scheduled, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the chaos swirling around him. His sister Emily had to take leave from her teaching position to handle media requests, while his elderly mother received visits from reporters seeking insights into the character of the man who had dared to challenge royal authority. The turning point came when Queen Elizabeth's former private secretary, Lord Christopher Gite, granted a rare interview to the BBC. Speaking carefully but clearly, he noted that the late Queen had always believed that the monarchy's strength came from treating all people with dignity, regardless of their position in society. Her Majesty understood that respect must flow in all directions, he said. The crown serves the people, and those who serve the crown deserve to be treated with the same consideration that they show to the institution. The interview was widely seen as a devastating critique of Queen Camilla's handling of the situation, delivered by someone whose loyalty to the monarchy was unquestionable. Royal historians noted that Lord Gite's intervention represented the institutional voice of the monarchy itself, suggesting that Thomas's position had support from the very heart of the establishment he had challenged. Faced with mounting pressure and the prospect of lasting damage to the monarchy's reputation, Queen Camilla made the decision to act decisively. On Friday morning, exactly 1 week after the initial confrontation, she requested a private meeting with Thomas Mitchell. The meeting, held in the Queen's private study, lasted over an hour and included no other participants except the 2 individuals whose conflict had captured the attention of an entire nation. Details of their conversation were never officially disclosed, but sources close to the situation later revealed that Queen Camilla had offered a personal apology for her remarks and acknowledged that Thomas's years of dedicated service deserved better recognition. More significantly, she reportedly committed to implementing changes in how royal household staff were treated, including new protocols for addressing grievances and ensuring that all employees felt their contributions were valued. The resolution that emerged from their private meeting surprised many observers. Rather than dismissing Thomas or accepting his resignation, Queen Camilla announced that he would be promoted to a senior position in royal security and tasked with reviewing staff treatment policies across all royal residences. The move was seen as a remarkable vindication of his decision to speak out, transforming him from a potential victim of royal displeasure into an agent of institutional change. In a carefully worded public statement, the palace announced that recent discussions had highlighted the importance of ensuring that all royal household employees felt valued and respected. While the statement did not explicitly reference the confrontation between Queen Camilla and Thomas, its timing and content left no doubt about the connection. The statement also announced new initiatives to improve staff welfare and create better channels for addressing employee concerns. The public response to the resolution was overwhelmingly positive, with many commentators praising both Queen Camilla's willingness to acknowledge her mistakes and Thomas's courage in challenging unfair treatment. The story was hailed as an example of how institutions could evolve and improve when individuals were willing to speak truth to power, even at personal risk. Thomas Mitchell returned to duty in his new role with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that his moment of moral courage had created lasting positive change. His promotion ensured that future generations of royal staff would have an advocate within the system who understood their experiences and challenges. The loose thread that had triggered Queen Camilla's initial criticism had been forgotten, but the principles Thomas had defended that morning would influence royal household management for years to come. The incident became a watershed moment in the modern monarchy's evolution, demonstrating that even institutions steeped in centuries of tradition could adapt and improve when confronted with valid criticism. Thomas Mitchell's journey from Yorkshire coal miner's son to senior royal security officer embodied the very best of British values, proving that dignity, courage, and principled action could triumph over hierarchy and inherited privilege. In the months that followed, palace staff noted a marked improvement in their treatment by royal family members, with several employees crediting Thomas's courageous stand for creating a more respectful workplace environment. The young guard who had simply wanted to serve his country with honor had achieved something far more significant. He had helped ensure that the monarchy itself lived up to the values it claimed to represent.